Welcome to the first virtual Jamstack conference, the largest Jamstack conference so far, taken online due to the current COVID pandemic. We had originally planned to hold this conference on location in London, and of course the current situation meant that we had to take it online. On the one hand, I'm extremely excited about being able to reach so many of you. There'll be thousands of people tuning in right now. But on the other hand, of course, I miss actually getting together with you all out in the real world. There's something special about the hallway talks, the drinks, the sense of community we can get when we get together in a space around the Jamstack. This time, this online conference is going to have to be the space, and it's going to be a really exciting day with very interesting presentations. Of course, this is a time where the current COVID pandemic is the big theme for all of us. And it's been a big theme around the internet. It's been a big theme around access to each other in virtual media like this one. It's been a big theme around the access to entertainment. But for the web, access to information is also a really big theme of this global pandemic and this global situation. And the web has always been central to this idea of sharing information and accessing information from all over the world and from all kinds of devices and all kinds of places. The last time we saw a pandemic outbreak back in 2003, there was 23 articles published that year around the SARS outbreak. This year, we've had more than 10,000 articles published already around the COVID-19 outbreak, and more are still coming. This is a huge volume of information, and it's a truly global phenomenon with researchers all over the world talking to each other, communicating online, sharing information with public and researchers and data scientists, pulling together to figure out how to tackle this problem. At the same time, it's also a very local phenomenon. It's also a phenomenon that has us all looking to our local communities and trying to figure out how to best manage, how to control this, how to follow the guidelines, how to report what's going on. We've seen here in San Francisco, where I'm based, 150% growth in traffic to the San Francisco Chronicle. And Seattle Times and the Boston Globes has also seen like more than 100% increase in traffic in this period of time. People really crave information and they're looking for it online. And there's certainly been other world events that's been global, but this one feels so different because information sharing is so important to actually tackling the event, to actually getting to a different place. We're in a place where the access from people to the information from researchers, where access from policymakers to researchers, where access from policymakers to the people and the other way around is really critical and essential. So this global web of information is more important than ever. And this also really ties back to the origins of the web. When Tim Berners-Lee first launched the very first website at CERN, the Research Institute, it was very much about this idea of sharing academic information. It was about a vision of much academic information being freely available to everyone, to anyone. At Netlify, right since we began, this idea of an open and independent web has also been extremely important for us. And when this pandemic hit, we went out and saw a lot of interest from researchers, from activists, from people around the world trying to actually tackle this and address it in different ways. And we decided to help out in the way we could by making our service freely available. One of the sites that took advantage of this, that we've been extremely excited of playing some small part of, is covidtracking.com. And Aaron from COVID Tracking will give a super interesting talk about that project later today. It's a really exciting project that is based around sharing data from all over the US and making it available to anyone with an interest. It's based around a modern workflow around GitHub and Git with people from all over the web industry contributing. And it's a project that's reached places like the White House or the New York Times or public institutions. It's been widely circulated and really important for people to understand this crisis. And in general, on Netlify, we've seen on the free COVID plan more than 35 million unique visitors just within the last 30 days. We've had days with almost 100 million requests a day to projects on this free plan. So it's been incredible to be able to form some part of an attempt at the solution of this crisis and on finding information around it and distributing information. Of course, even if the web was built from this, it's not been without challenges. So when Tim Berners-Lee made that very first website back in CERN, he actually put up this executive summary around the web. And one of the things he described as the goal for the web was to be simple. He mentioned having a very small startup effort, this idea that it should be really easy to publish something and get it in front of the world. And yet today, when you look around, it's probably more common to see notions like this. Why is the modern web development so complicated? Why is there so much going on? And it's actually for good reasons. Like today, we're building really advanced applications. We're reaching a very large global user base. And we need often really complex infrastructure to accomplish that. When we think about like the kind of applications that we build on the web today, it's a very far cry from the simple informational page that Tim Berners-Lee first shared. This is just a few screens from COVID-19japan.com, one of the sites on the free COVID plan at Netlify. And there's many of these kinds of projects with highly interactive data visualizations, with data that you can go and explore and break down and see in different formats in the browser, and data that comes from very many different data sources and pulls together a lot of information. It's also data that's reaching a very large global user base. Today, there is around 4.5 billion internet users. And those internet users are often getting more demanding. During the last year, we saw that the speed of broadband connections in general increased with more than 20%. And at the same time, the difference between users are also getting larger. So we're now seeing 125 time difference between the place with the slowest internet connections in general and the place with the fastest internet connections in general. So not only are there more users than ever, and they are distributed more widely than ever, but they also come with very different devices and very different connectivities. Even within the US, we're seeing a lot of areas where people are actually accessing websites from very bad public Wi-Fi connections, or even a large amount of people that don't even have their own connectivity. And of course, in order to reach that amount of users and deliver these modern, really interactive and compelling user experiences, we've had to resort to more and more complex infrastructure. I like this diagram from Amazon around just the best practices for hosting a WordPress site, and it's immensely complex what we have to do, right? And if we look at the result of that, these are some numbers from the HTTP archive, just scanning all of the web and seeing like what's actually the median lighthouse score, how are the sites that we produce, and of course, when there is all this complexity involved, it's no wonder that most developers don't have the time to really optimize for performance, for accessibility, for best practices, or any of these concerns. Laurie Voss, who will speak in a moment about the results of the Jamstack survey and the whole state of the Jamstack ecosystem, has a great blog post with this made-up illustration. So these numbers are just made-up numbers, but I still think the concept of this chart is very interesting. It's this idea that if you were a web developer back in the 90s, you actually had to think about physical servers. You have to think about power cords and stuff like that. You probably had a closet with your servers in them that you were aware of and that you have to deal with once in a while. On the other hand, you would never have to deal with client-side optimizations or client-side builds or responsive design or anything like that. So as the web has progressed and the demands on the experiences we're building and the devices we're reaching have gone up, we've had to sort of build layers of abstractions that takes some of the complexity away and makes it possible for a developer to work without considering those lower layers of the stack. And that's been one of the driving forces behind the idea of the Jamstack. This idea that the stack has moved up a level, that we've transcended from thinking of the stack in terms of the specific programming language we use on the server, from the web server we run on, from the specific database, and instead of thinking at the layer of what get delivered to the end users in terms of pre-built markup, in terms of the JavaScript that runs directly in the browser, and in terms of these APIs we have access to. By doing this, we are able to let developers focus on building websites instead of focusing on infrastructure. And we are able to make performance part of the platform itself instead of making it something that developers have to have as an afterthought. We are also able to ensure that the best practices become common practices and not something that you have to know about and look up and think extra for to accomplish. We've also been able to simplify the way we reach users once again to a simple git push, and your content can reach any of these 4.5 billion internet users. We've made it so any pull request can turn into its own staging environment, and you can get a URL you can share, you can iterate on, and that you can preview and test. And if we look a bit at sort of the evolution of the web stack, we had this legacy web where every web request would go through this whole cycle of talking to a database, of fetching content, of putting it together into templates and HTML, and then serving that HTML to the user. Then we started maybe moving just some code optimizations, minimizations, image optimizations, and so on into a separate build step that we could sort of do ahead of time. And with time, we started to figure out, okay, we could actually take more and more of those concerns. We could do all those database lookups in the build process. We could fetch the content in the build process. We could actually render the templates in the build process and then create the HTML and just delegate just serving the HTML to the server. And instead of just HTML, we really started moving towards this concept of a front end delivered directly to a browser from an edge node. Like, we started thinking about like decoupling the front-end presentation layer completely from the back-end. And that allowed us to take the front-end layer and distribute it to networks across all over the world. This is a chart of Netlify's network running across all the different cloud providers across the globe. We also figured out that for the connections to the APIs and even for building the APIs themselves, we could often resort to the idea of serverless functions where developers could just write functions together with their front end and have it deployed through the same Git-driven workflow without having to worry about maintenance, without having to worry about separate staging environments and production environment. Again, every single pull request just becomes a URL you can visit and preview and test. And we've seen that as a powerful way to interact with this rich ecosystem of APIs. An example would be building an e-commerce on top of Stripe, just with a front end, globally distributed, talking to serverless function, and nothing else. This is such a superpower as a front-end developer compared to how the situation was years ago when we had to build all of these components ourselves. And we've seen this really rich ecosystem emerge around the Jamstack. A lot of them will be present at this virtual conference, in the expo, and in work sessions and other talks. And it's been really exciting to see this ecosystem mature more and more and grow more and more. And when we think about how we build complex applications today, like e-commerce, we see that we have this build step where we've been able to take more and more of the heavy lifting, in this case, maybe inventory and all the sizes, all the catalogs, the ratings, the prices, and pre-build that in a separate step from anything that the user will need to wait for or interact with. And then for the truly dynamic parts like advanced search or filtering or the actual e-commerce functionality, the shopping cart, we can run that client side with JavaScript and APIs. So if we think about going further, what's next for this stack, and what's the next architectural pieces that we should look at and that we should think about? That's of course something that at Netlify we've always been looking at, like what are the next pieces we can unlock to make people build even more complex projects, even faster projects, even better user experiences, even faster. So one of the layers that we've been looking at for a while now is the build layer. This is a really crucial component with this idea that the more we can do at build time versus runtime, the faster performance we get, the more reliability we get, the better results we get. And the build step is not just one step. At Netlify, we run a lot of different processes whenever we run a build. We'll fetch your repository, we'll fetch a dependency cache, we'll install new dependencies, we'll run the actual build command, we'll send notifications if that went well or if it went wrong, we'll clean up the cache, we'll store the dependencies for next time. All of these things happens automatically. But this whole build cycle, it's easy to imagine that there's a set of things that we would do in different steps that's not specific to any one build. For example, if we think about a global project reaching billions of people that has vital information, one thing is to build it and make sure that it's available and globally distributed. But how do we know that it's also accessible, that people can actually access the data also when they are using screen readers or limited devices or any of these situations? That shouldn't be a concern that every single web developer should have to reinvent on their own. And there's of course tooling available to run automated tests against accessibility. What if you could just add a step saying like, I want to run accessibility testing, and then it would happen. The same goes for testing after a build that what we built is actually working. Like one thing is that it built and that the build finished, but how do we know that we built the right thing? We might have test suites in tools like Cypress and so on. What if we didn't have to think about the instrumentation for that on a project by project basis or with specific plugins for specific frameworks? What if we could just think of it as a general layer, as kind of a set of Legos where we could say like, I want accessibility testing and I want Cypress tests for my build. That's what we've been working on at Netlify. We launched a private beta of build plugins at our San Francisco conference last year, and we have a community-driven set of plugins that people can access and install in their projects, that's shared on NPM and GitHub. But today, we're announcing the general availability of build plugins, and with that, we're also introducing UI-driven installs of build plugins. And that's something I'm really excited about because, again, it takes some of these concerns that before you would have to tailor to every single project. And today you can say, like, accessibility checking. That's not really like a unique concern for you. What if you can just click a button, add an accessibility plugin to your project, and have it run tests against the output of your build automatically? And today you can do that with Netlify, and this is an example of a build running and getting stopped because the accessibility plugin discovered that this project didn't quite live up to the standards required to actually make it available to everybody. And once a build plugin fails in that way, you can just directly click in and see what were the problems, what caused this to fail. So we're really excited about this, and there'll be much more content coming around this. But I also think it's sort of a general evolution of going further and say, like, one of the core ideas behind Netlify was that once we establish a stack like this, once we really say, okay, we're going to decouple the front end and the back end, we're going to have these separate APIs and these separate concerns, there was a lot of operational complexity that we could just completely take away. this is just one step further in just that journey of saying, like, there are all these common build concerns that we can build a community around and that we can build common solutions for instead of individual solutions. Another part of the stack where we think that there's still a lot of innovation to be done is around the edge node and the edge content. So if you look at a typical Netlify edge node, we have just like in the build, we do a set of steps whenever a request come in. Of course, we'll do the certificate resolution and the domain lookup and so on. But once we know the actual site, we'll have an edge rules engine that allows complex features like rewrites or proxying or geolocation. We'll then either resolve a file that we serve directly from the edge node to the user. We'll decide to proxy somewhere. We'll invoke a serverless function, or any of these options. Again, these are some of the use cases that we've built into our platform, and we've built a declarative set of rules. But what if you want to do something that doesn't quite fit that exact rule set? So later today, David Calavera, our CTO, will be giving a short demo on how we are thinking about this space. What if we could write edge handlers that plug in to different parts of this request cycle and run your code directly on the edge server to handle things like custom authentication patterns, localization, personalization, rewrites, anything that the community can imagine. That's what we're imagining with our programmable edge layer. And that's something that I'm really excited about. Netlify taking a position of leadership in and pushing forward. I think it'll allow a lot of new use cases for the Jamstack. We have a really cool day ahead of us. Right after I'm done talking now, Laurie Wash will be giving the state of the Jamstack, talking through the current universe of the Jamstack, all the different tools and platforms and how people are using this and what they're using it for. After that, we'll sort of go more back to the origins of a lot of the ideas behind the Jamstack. Harper Reed, who was the CTO of the Obama campaign and pioneered a lot of these ideas with a Jekyll-driven campaign side, will have a fireside chat with Francis Berryman, that's been part of the UK.gov, who's currently at the Digital Services, who's been part of Code for America, and has a ton of experience in this whole space of civil communication on the web. Then we'll have our lightning launches that are always exciting, and where our CTO will be showing what we're working on in terms of edge handlers, and other companies will be showing new evolutions in the Jamstack space. And later, Erin from COVID Tracking is going to give a really exciting talk about this incredible project. So I'm really looking forward to the rest of the day and looking forward to sharing it with you all. So thanks so much for tuning in. I'll be around during all the sessions, and I'm looking forward to talk to you all, meet you all virtually, and hopefully for the next conference we can all also get together in person. Thank you so much.